All right, you have heard me talk about The Terminal List, how much I liked both the novel and the show. I read the novel when it came out and thought it was just great action stuff. The Terminal List on Amazon Prime was a terrific series. Jack Carr is the author of that book, and I think 5, soon to be 6 more novels. He is a former Navy SEAL who put that expertise into telling the story of James Reese. The first book is The Terminal List, and the show was great. Jack, it's great to see you. It's great to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is fantastic.
To begin with, I have to ask you, because I've had books made into movies and it's quite an experience. Did you like the show as much as I did?
I did. I was fortunate enough to be involved with the process, and most of the time they like to get rid of the author right away in Hollywood.
Yep.
They give you a little bit of something just to make you semi-happy, and off you go. Just so you're not on set saying, "You ruined my vision. You've ruined my book." But I was very fortunate that both Antoine Fuqua and Chris Pratt and the showrunner David DiGilio, they all wanted me involved from the very beginning. So for me, it was an education. And I got to see this thing, work on the pilot with the showrunner, see him and Chris Pratt and Antoine take it around to Netflix and Amazon and Hulu and all these different places, see the Amazon deal come to fruition, and then see the writer's room come together. And that was interesting because now you have, I think it was 12 people that came together that read the book and then put their kind of spin on each of their episodes. And then they go on to other projects. And then that reverts to me and Chris and Antoine and the showrunner. And then we get back in there and fiddle. And then you start casting. And then you start production and go all the way through that. And of course, all these scripts that were written in nice air-conditioned offices, kind of like a plan in the military when you're just doing it. You think you're just brilliant looking at it on a sand table in a nice air-conditioned space. And then you get out there and realize the enemy has a vote. Same thing with scripts. You get out there and you look around and say, oh, this does not work anymore based on location and terrain, or what some of these actors have brought to the role in episodes 1, 2, and 3 really changes what happens in 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So I got to see all of that, be involved in all those changes, and then go through post-production and right into seeing it hit screens. So I was very fortunate, and I knew there was going to be changes. That's just how it goes. I knew that you're telling a story visually now, but to have each of those changes kind of rooted in the realities of modern combat and in the foundation of the novel, hey, you can't get much more than that once you turn something over to a group in Hollywood.
That's a pretty good deal. Did they let you, I mean, since you are a Navy SEAL, we're a Navy SEAL, did they let you, teach the actors how to behave and how to move? Did you feel it was kind of accurate?
Well, if I lived in Los Angeles, I would have been on set every day. But because we're out here in Park City, Utah, and I had another book to write, I would go back and forth. But I was so fortunate that I had 3 guys on the set every single day that had served. And it's Max Adams, who's a former Army Ranger, who was one of the writers, Jared Shaw, who was a SEAL with me and gave the book to Chris Pratt and is the reason the whole thing came to be in the first place, and Ray Mendoza, another SEAL buddy of mine from War Office Productions, who's a technical advisor. Those 3 guys were on there every day. And because of our friendship, they really wanted this thing to be authentic. They were invested in it much more so than just professionally. They were personally invested in this thing. So I think without those 3 guys on set every day, it would have been a much different series.
You know, I liked the book so much that I was drawn to the series, but before I watched it, looked at the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, and then was convinced because the critics were much less enthusiastic than the people, which I always know means it's a good show. What do you think, what were the critics complaining about?
Well, it's we knew from the outset when we sat down with that pilot episode that when we wrote the pilot episode, and by we, I mean the showrunner, and I was just really learning and advising a tiny bit, but we knew that we weren't making this thing for critics. And we knew because you can look at shows and you can say, oh, they made this for critics, and you can kind of and there's a reason for that. Want to work on somebody's career resume type of a thing for another project or whatever it might be. There's a lot of strategy that goes into that sort of thing. But we were very mindful of the fact that we wanted to make this for the men and women who went down range over the last 20 years. We wanted to capture really that mindset of a modern warrior. So when someone sat down and cracked a beer to watch this show, they would know, hey, we made this for them. We didn't make this for critics. We made it for them. And we made something special. So that was the guiding principle this whole time. It wasn't like, oh, we should probably do this for critics or we should probably do this for so-and-so. No, it was always for that person that's going to sit down on the couch, crack that beer, watch it, and say, oh, these guys made something. They put in the effort at least. And of course, there's a couple Hollywood things here and there. It's Hollywood. But we really put in the effort to get it right, capturing that mindset of a modern warrior.
Is there something particular that you see in Hollywood movies about war or about the military that drives you insane, that makes you think, like, the minute you see it, you think, oh, they didn't know what they were talking about?
Yeah, I try not to watch it with that eye, because that's just a miserable way to go through life if you're always looking for the negative.
Yeah.
So you can choose. You can look for the good in things, or you can just wait and look for the bad and then have it drive you nuts and then tell everybody about it for your 2 Twitter followers or whatever it might be. But that's a really rough way to go through life, I think. Sometimes it's unavoidable, and you see it and you see something and you see people talking and use language that you wouldn't use in the military, or you call something by a name that you wouldn't because there's an acronym or that. And it's tough. So I try to be as forgiving as possible. But now, after going through this process, I'm even more forgiving, because I realize how many opportunities there are for things to completely go off the rails. There's so many people working on these things, 350 people on set every day, multiple executive producers, multiple directors, multiple executives in the Amazon chain of command in this particular case. And so there are so many opportunities for people to come in and mess things up. So now when I sit down and watch something, I am just so appreciative of all the effort that went in, because no matter how horrible it is, a lot of effort went into that. And a lot of people devoted a year, 2 years of their lives, 3 years in some cases, getting things out there. And I'm just, I just appreciate how much work went into it. But yeah, there are a few things here and there, just weapons handling for the most part, tactics, gear. If you see something that someone would never use that had the background of that character, or they're handling weapons in a way that that character with their background would never handle, like those sort of things stand out. But I try to enjoy the story, appreciate it for what it is, and not just zero in on the negative.
Fair enough. One of the things I noticed, I mean, you were a Navy SEAL, so obviously you believe in being the tip of the spear of this country. But all the villains that James Reese is facing are not, in fact, except in the beginning, he's not, in fact, facing the foreign enemies of America. He's facing the enemies within. And some of those people are business people who have put profit above lives, and political people who've put power above lives. Why? That's an interesting choice to have made. Why did you make James Reese's enemies Americans, basically?
I think it was very natural and very therapeutic. And I started writing in December of 2014. So I had about a year left in the military. My job became to get out of this gigantic bureaucracy that is the military at that point, going to medical and dental and going to get read out of secret programs, turn in gear. But before you do any of that, because it's the military, you have to stand in line to make your appointment to then get back in line to come back and do it again. So point being, you have a lot of time on your hands. So I started writing and really got into the meat of it in 2015. But that's almost 15 years at war. And I was in the military for all of that time. So you got to see decisions made at the strategic level that really impacted people at the tactical level, who stood up to serve their country. And now they're out there and they're put in, and we saw it, obviously, we're recording this on the 26th when Abbey Gate happened during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so you see those strategic level decisions by people in Washington in nice air-conditioned offices affect that E1, E2, E3, E4 soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine at that tactical level. And so I think it was very therapeutic to write this book, and you can read it at a few different levels. You can just say, grab it off the shelf on your way to the beach or on your way to your plane flight and say, oh, there's a great story about revenge, which it was. And I had a yellow sticky that said revenge right on my computer as I was writing, so that everything either directly or indirectly had to come back to that theme. But really it's about somebody who is becoming an insurgent. And I show that in a few different ways. His beard grows throughout the series in Amazon and in the show. Hair gets longer. He raids the armory of what is now his enemy, his armory, in the book. So you can read it as that as well. Someone becoming what they'd been fighting, essentially becoming the monster that they've been fighting. And then also it is someone, a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan, bringing those wars home to the front doors of people who have been sending young men and women to their deaths for 20 years plus now, but at the time I wrote it 14, 15, 16 years. So you can really read it on a few different levels, but I think that was really, and I didn't consciously come up with that. It was just a subconscious thing that became very natural as I started outlining this and then writing the narrative.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things that's really interesting about you that when I was preparing to talk to you, I only found it out then, was that you have a literary background. You're not a guy who just sat down and said, I'm going to write a book. And I've read a lot of books like that that aren't very good. I mean, that was one of the things that grabbed me about the Terminal List. I thought, oh, here's a guy who not only knows all of this information about fighting, but he actually knows how to put an English sentence together. Where did that come from?
Right. So my mom was a librarian, still is. So I grew up with books and a love of reading. I knew I wanted to serve my country from a very early age. My grandfather was killed in World War II off Okinawa in 1945. He was a Corsair pilot, which is a plane that had the gull wings that would fold up like that, Pappy Boynton's plane. So I knew I was going to serve. And when I was 7, I found out about SEALs. And my mom, being a librarian, took me down to the local library to also teach me how to research. And back in the early 80s, as you remember, if you wanted to research something on special operations, you could pretty much read everything in about an hour. Maybe an hour and a half if you're a slow reader. There wasn't that much out there about special operations in particular. But what I did start learning when I got to about age 10, 5th grade, that's when Hunt for Red October came out. And by 6th grade, for sure, I was reading the same books my parents were reading. But back in those days and all the way through the 90s, a lot of the protagonists in those stories had backgrounds I wanted in real life one day. So they had backgrounds as Navy SEALs, as Army Special Forces, as Marine snipers, as CIA paramilitary officers in Vietnam. That was kind of the background of the 80s and 90s action hero protagonist in these novels by Tom Clancy and Nelson DeMille and A.J. Quinnell and J.C. Pollock and Mark Olden and David Morrell and all these guys that I read growing up, Stephen Hunter. And so I was really, and I didn't realize that at the time, but I was giving myself an education in the art of storytelling from the masters in the genre that I was going to write in one day. So I made a very conscious decision way back then that one day I would serve my country specifically as a SEAL. And then I would write thrillers in this genre that I was enjoying so much because there was so much magic in those pages. And for my kids today, I feel bad because there's so many distractions. And I try to do my best as a parent, to get that iPad or iPhone. There's just so many more inputs coming in. Back when we grew up, there was the Atari 2600. And you could only spend a certain amount of time playing that Atari 2600. You couldn't spend days doing that. So I escaped into these pages of these books, and it was just magic. And then also my mom introduced me to Joseph Campbell through a series of interviews he did with Bill Moyers in 1988 called The Power of It. And she sat me down and we watched that, and I was enthralled by that. I read Hero with a Thousand Faces. And then I think everything I read or watched from that point on, I kind of filtered through the hero's journey. And whether it was conscious or subconscious, I was taking notes. What was working, what was not working in these novels or in these films or in these series. And that really laid a foundation for me as I got out of the military, because I didn't wake up one day and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give this writing thing a try. What should I have been reading for the last 35 years? I'd done that reading already. I had that foundation, so I didn't have to start from scratch. And then I started writing, got it to Simon & Schuster. And I think that's really what stood out to them as well, is that I had this foundation. And also I brought in these feelings and emotions from my time downrange. So I didn't have to interview a sniper from Ramadi in 2006 and then ask him questions and have his answers filter through other interviews that I had done, books that I read, movies that I've seen, preconceived notions I may have, and then put it into a fictional narrative. No, it all comes from my heart and soul directly onto the page. So I think that stood out to Simon & Schuster and has stood out to readers as well.
That's really interesting. I loved Campbell. I read everything Campbell wrote, and it's a very good thing to have in your head when you're telling stories. What happens now? What's the latest book called?
Well, it hasn't been released yet, the name.
Okay.
But the latest one that just came out is In the Blood, came out in May, hit all the #1 New York Times things, which is amazing. And I really thank everybody who took a risk on me as a new author and told a friend, because that's how this happened. But the one I'm writing right now, I'm in book 6. So as soon as we're done here, I go right back to writing book 6. And I think we announce the title in the next few weeks for that one. But I'm in the middle of that. Should come out in the spring, and I just want every single book to be better than the last one. And that's something I take very seriously, because people are trusting me with their time. They're never getting that time back. And they don't know if they have 5 minutes left on this planet, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. We don't know. But they're not getting any of the time back they spend in these pages. And that's something I take very seriously. They're trusting me with that time. So all my energy and effort goes into making the best product possible.
Will there be another series? I haven't heard about it being picked up for a second season.
We shall see. I hope so. But you never know. But right now, I hope so. But if there's not, I'm just thrilled we got one season out of it, and I could not be more thankful for the friendships that I made there. That's what stands out more than anything else. And then what I learned as well about storytelling, about visual storytelling, about production. It was really an education over these last few years, and everything that I learned really does end up in future projects.
Yeah, Jack Carr, the author of The Terminal List, a terrific book. It really is, and it's really nice talking to a great. And I'm really happy that you had such a great experience with Hollywood. It doesn't always happen.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Take care.
Like and subscribe for more great content, and subscribe to the Andrew Klavan Podcast.